folks. Welcome back to another podcast of Broken Brains with your host, Bruce Parkman, sponsored by the Mac Parkman Foundation. Our podcast is focused on the issue of repetitive brain trauma in the forms of repetitive head impacts from contact sports and repetitive blast exposure for our military veterans, and what these issues are doing to the brains of our children, our athletes, and our veterans, contributing to basically the largest preventable cause of mental illness in this country. On this podcast, we go out there and we find the leading researchers, scientists, patients, advocates, authors, and journalists that are reporting on this issue to determine what you can do to be more aware of this, how this has impacted or can impact your life, your child's lives, and what we need to do as a society to make better decisions, to make sports safer, to make military service safer, and more importantly, to diagnose, identify, and treat those people suffering from repetitive brain trauma. Today, we have another amazing guest, Dr. Pam Arnell, who I happen to know very personally because I've been through some of her protocols. Dr. Pam Arnell is the executive director for 220, a nonprofit for veterans, first responders, and Gold Star families. She is also a first responder and has been in the volunteer fire department since 2008, two very full-time jobs. Her husband served 26 years and unfortunately passed away from cancer, which has been determined to be from burn pit exposure, probably in Iraq War. She's been a youth service officer for Giles County, Tennessee since 2014, and she owns Arnell's Counseling Service and serves as the adjunct faculty at Columbia State Community College, teaching in the psychology program and education classes. She's been a member of the Giles County Counter Fire and Rescue Squad, the member of the Pulaski Lions Club, and served on the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network as the regional committee chair since 2004. And she served on the State Advisory Council for Suicide Prevention from 2004 and 14, and has completed an analysis as part of her dissertation on the Tennessee strategy for suicide prevention based on original national strategies for suicide prevention. Dr. Pam Arnell, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Good morning, and thank you for asking me to be on here. Thank you so much.
No, great.
Very humbling.
No, it was great because I was just in the state of Tennessee. We were working on some school security issues. On my other side, I own a technology company that does amazing things with data. And I had to really get my accent dialed in because since I've been in North Carolina, I have not been able to not understand an American for quite a while. So I was like, "What'd you say, Chief?" So pretty good. But welcome to the show. So let's talk a little bit about 220 to start. Or all right. So you've been a volunteer firefighter. You've obviously been in the first responder space. Military veterans. What got you into, counseling, or what drove the recognition that we have a problem?
So actually, whenever it's kind of funny, I grew up in the Blue family. My dad was in law enforcement, and my dream was to be in law enforcement. But back then, believe it or not, they had a height requirement. And so in Tennessee, there was a height requirement, and my little 5'1.5" self did not meet the criteria.
Okay.
Even though I tried explaining to them, I can get in places none of you big people can. I mean, do you not understand? Like, I can get in those places. But they actually lifted that at some point in time later. So I've always known that I was going to be in the helping field. My mission and my passion has always been to serve and protect, even from a young age, to be a lot like my dad. And so, in knowing that I was not going to be able to go through the academy, I actually decided to go into counseling. At one point in time, I decided that I was going to have, I opened Arnell's Counseling and had that for many years. I had a contract with the state of Tennessee, working with children and families that were at risk for coming into custody. And in saying that, at one point in time, they finally lifted the height requirement, but the sheriff's department in my county had a reserve deputy program that they initiated, and I was one of the very first ones in that program. It was under Kyle Helton at the time, but ultimately, I spent 5 years as a reserve deputy and did that up until I became the youth service officer in Giles County. Um, that position was really more of a judicial field. My boss at that time was the judge. So I did that, and how I got connected with 220. I had not heard of 220, but my past fire chief and past assistant fire chief were aware of 220 and had asked for me to take the training. I told them, and I have said this many times, I didn't have time for that because the YSO position required a lot of my time. I mean, 24/7, weekends, holidays, vacation. I'd be on
Wow.
vacation, and I'm getting called by law enforcement. So uh, ultimately, I said to appease my past fire chief and past assistant fire chief, I would take the training just to go through the process and have that training for, the fire department and the members here in the county.
So
That's
at
how I
that
got here.
time, you've been heavily involved with first responders, and as a counselor, of course, you were probably dealing with, quite a lot of, tragedy, but on more of the family side, right? The social work side. What got you to transition over to veterans, first responders, and focus on them exclusively?
So even when I had the counseling business, I always took care of the first responders, including the Leos, um, in my county. And that was just because, one, I know what we went through with my dad, but then also at that point in time, I knew what I had seen, what I experienced as a reserve deputy, but also within the fire department. It's just always been a passion for me for first responders and within the armed forces. Being involved with the armed force, military family. My husband served 26 years, and he and I met right after he got out of Desert Storm. So I know and lived through the military family piece with him. And, even after he passed away, it's been the military family, the first responder family that have taken care of me to make sure that, I have everything that I need.
Well, that's amazing. And then now, how did you get involved with 220? Tell us what 220 does, because I happen to think that the 22 has to deal with the number of veterans that we hypothetically lose every day in this country.
Right. 220 was developed by veterans, other leaders. April would be 7 years ago, and it's got the trauma resiliency protocol, the emotions management process, and ultimately the leaders that established 220 created some processes that were, part of the RTM, part of the neurological linguistic programming, and has basically evolved through the leaders or the leadership. And so 22 on average, it's reported that 22 a day die by suicide, which would be within our armed forces. We do know that number is going to be a lot higher, and the reason that's going to be higher is because not all deaths are reported as suicide. So while there unfortunately is that 22, and again, we know that it's going to be a lot higher, it's still an issue. And looking at today in 2025, we're still having those high numbers, and it's what's happening and what's been going on to try and prevent that has not worked. And so when you look at those individuals within the armed forces who won't go to the VA, they did go to the VA, their appointments are canceled or rescheduled or whatever that scenario looks like. The issue is in 2025, we still have even one that dies a day by suicide is too many. And so we as a country have got to do better for our armed forces. And it's not just, within the armed forces, it's within the first responder field as well. We have a high rate of firefighters and law enforcement who die by suicide. And
And
we
I
need
have
to address that.
No, I'm just becoming aware of that through a lot of the journeys that I'm taking with veterans, or next to veterans. Um, why has the suicide rate not changed? I mean, the VA spent, I think, last year $700 million or some crazy amount of money on suicide. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on this, and I want to hear what your perspective is. I mean, you deal with suicidal vets or vets that are considering suicide quite often. And I would just want to get what's your take on that? Why do we still have such a high suicide rate? What are the factors here that people need to know about?
So based on experience with, family members, I've got a lot of family who've served in the military, and, my husband served, but in listening to stories, a lot of it's going to be they don't want talk therapy. They will not go to the VA for many reasons. If they do go to the VA, it's because they know that they feel that there's not another option. There's a lot that are falling through the cracks because they won't go to the VA. So when you're looking at, especially within the armed forces, they don't want to talk about that content. And then on top of that, a lot of them don't want to be put on medication. And so when you explain to them, when they reach out, either, by word of mouth or by the 800 number, or just in talking with the armed forces, they'll tell me, Pam, I don't want to talk about it. Well, with 220, you're not going to talk about it. We don't allow you to talk about the content. That protects you, that protects my peer coaches as well, because there is something called vicarious trauma. And, vicarious trauma means it didn't directly happen to you, but by hearing and being told that trauma can become vicarious trauma. A lot of therapists, mental health professionals have received vicarious trauma because those that are working in the mental health world, they're hearing that trauma. When you kind of go back and look at how the VA looks at just only having, the talk therapy, they don't look at the innovative, holistic platforms that are out there that are beneficial and healing for the armed forces and for, the first responders. And when they don't recognize that, then they don't change. And when you don't change, then nothing changes. And so unless there's a change, those numbers, unfortunately, are not going to go down, because the VA will not, if you don't have certain criteria within applying for grants with the VA, they have it set that they want it to be a certain focus. Well, what they're not hearing is they're not hearing what the armed force members and their families are saying. And that becomes an issue. You have to be able to hear and listen and know what's being said. And that's not happening.
And that's a shame. And we do know that the suicide rate is probably higher, because of, as you said, there's other aspects of, alcoholism and drug overdoses that aren't really classified as suicides. Same problem we have on the repetitive head impact side. Um, but dialing into, the whole VA issue, for on your on when it comes to therapy, I've talked to so many veterans that have told me that they just never want to see a VA psychologist or psychiatrist ever again.
Mm-hmm.
And you know and of course they don't want to be on the drugs. And I just recently left an ayahuasca retreat where I was there to help veterans, and I was talking to veterans that had 17 different pills. 17. Like they said, the VA had given them so many pills that they had buckets of pills, and they had to get off them for 2 weeks. They wouldn't even tell the VA that they got off their medication so they could have another chance of recovering, their sanity, recovering their mental stability, everything, right? And so, but they expressly focused on the therapy side. So you're on the therapy side. So number one, what is wrong with the therapy that these veterans are getting, in your opinion, or why are they upset? I mean, they tell me that they're not military veterans, they don't understand where I've been. They seem to just want to keep billing, and I just keep going back and nothing changes. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. And then let's go into your protocols, because I've experienced these, okay, and they are very profound and they do help. And so let's talk about first, why is the therapy models or protocols that are being prescribed not working, or not acceptable? And then what are you doing differently in how you address trauma therapy?
Sure. So, one of the things that I have heard and I've seen within the mental health field, and my board members call me the unicorn. So I'm going to kind of preface it to that. While I do have the clinical background, I also have the involvement with all the years of being in the military family, and then also being a first responder. When you look at someone going to the VA or any mental health professional, it's very important to establish rapport. And in establishing that rapport, it's, difficult on the mental health side, because if they've not experienced family or friends that are, very close to them within the armed forces or within the first responder, it's hard to establish that rapport. And you have to have that trust. So if you don't have the trust, it's going to be harder, and the rapport, it's going to be harder for them to open up. The other piece to that is they don't want to talk about the trauma. They don't want to have to live it over and over and over again. And then when you look at, unfortunately, with the turnover rate with the VA, when you look at, you have maybe made a connection and was able to build rapport with the mental health professional, and you go in for an appointment, guess what? That mental health professional is no longer there. You get a new therapist. And then you just have to start that cycle back over. That's a big deterrent into why they stop going, or they don't want to go to the VA, because there is such a high turnover rate.
And
As
they're
far
not
as
allowed.
22-0, so 22-0, I'm sorry, huh?
No, 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 but they're not allowed to follow that therapist out of the network. Is that what we're saying? Like, that therapist might get another job or work with somebody else, but now that they have that connection, the VA will not cover them when they want to go to see they want to continue the relationship with the therapist, and once again, the veteran's out of pocket if they want to continue that
Right,
assistance that's helping them. Okay,
right. Well, and
that's not
kind of
working.
backing up to that, another piece is, they have an appointment and then they've not been informed that the appointment has scheduled or canceled. So they show up for their appointment to find out at the VA that they do not have an appointment and it was not canceled.
Mm.
Just a lot of barriers. In regards to 22-0, so, I was not at the formation of 22-0. I came in after I had gone through the training and made it very clear that it was very important to get the academia side. Unfortunately, you just have to have the academia piece, the research piece. And after I went through the training, what I did is I went back and said, because I felt an immediate shift. I had 2 calls at the sheriff's department. I had 3 calls at the fire department, and I ended up being put on Ambien just so that I could sleep. And when I went through the training, part of that training is you actually have to go through the process. And that was a very defining moment for me, because I could immediately feel that shift, and I never talked about the content. And I recognized the value of the process, again, built on, RTM, built on the neurological linguistic programming. So it's
What,
not
what's
really,
what's what's RTM for our audience? RTM.
RTM is reconciliation of traumatic memories.
Oh, okay. All right.
And so when you look at pre-scores and post-scores, and I'll go into that in just a little bit, but having that immediate shift and having that, that night I went to sleep, and that was the last time I took Ambien.
So, what was different between what you went through as the process that you focus on now, and what was going on before? What shifted? Because I want the audience to understand that there are alternative therapies like this that are working. That we talk to the people that have been through these therapies, and we have huge amounts of people saying this helped me, but I can't get it through the VA. So what is the difference? And I know you have two different protocols. So talk to us about those protocols and what's different. Why are they more effective? Not only because they don't have to talk about trauma, but through the process, the impact on their brain, their psyche, their ego, whatever it is. Why are you seeing? I mean, I was referred to you by a close friend of ours that had been through your process and raves about the impact you had on his life. He was suicidal. A lot of combat exposure. And so just like our first responders who go through the same stress level as military, different job, different path. So why are you having such great impacts or significant impacts on these hurt human beings?
Well, we see trauma as being more neurological. I do not recognize trauma as a disorder. One of the things, when I went through the process or before I went through the process, hearing certain sounds, certain tones, especially, we have our little pager that we still use with the fire department, but certain sounds, certain smells would make me trigger and go back to those events. I wouldn't sleep. If I did sleep, I would sleep for maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then I was up because of the nightmares. When I went through the training, part of that training, like I said, is you're going through the process. The process, is basically getting someone in a safe place before, a safe place after, disconnecting those events, disconnecting the trauma, and then eventually disconnecting those negative emotions related to the events. When I went through the process, I didn't have to, one, talk about the content. Two, I didn't really have to spend a lot of time thinking about it, meaning once you have that emotional reaction to it, then we'll do some things called break states to bring you out of that trigger. That was significant for me. And not just within that realm, but then looking at the negative emotions. I had a lot of guilt. I had a lot of survivor guilt in relation to one particular incident that I worked with at the fire department. So looking at those aspects from the process of 22-0 compared to traditional talk therapy, it was very significant. It had a big impact. And I'll just share. So, the training was done virtually. And when we took a break, and after, I had gone through the process, I went into the room and my husband said, "Aren't you in class?" And I said, "Yes," because I was relaxed. I mean, he recognized that immediate shift as well. I was happy. I was joyful. I felt at peace. And prior to that, I was not. And he said, "Pam, I thought you were in class." And I said, "I've been in class. I've been in that room all day long." He said, "Have you been drinking Jack and Coke?" And I looked at him and
Maybe.
I said, "What?" He said, "You look like you've had 3 or 4 drinks of Jack and Coke." And so for him to recognize that, no, I did not have Jack and Coke during class, but for him to recognize that immediate reaction was huge. He said, "You're relaxed and, you just seem peaceful." He said, "That's how you are when you drink Jack and Coke." And I'm going, "Well, I promise you, I do not drink Jack and Coke."
Wow. Eh,
So for him to see that to me, that was significant. And then, I just said, I'm really tired. I really have to go lay down. And he looked at me, he said, "It's daylight." I said, "Dude, just shut up. Just hush. I've got to go lay down." And I couldn't explain to him because I didn't know why I was so tired at the time. I just knew that I had to go lay down. I slept all night long. And when we went in class the next day, I said, "What did y'all do to me?" My husband accused me of drinking Jack and Coke. I felt peaceful and I slept and I didn't wake up at all. And I went to sleep without Ambien. So having those changes, it is very, very significant, very different. I knew then, I knew at that point there was definitely a much better way for people to be healed from trauma than traditional talk therapy, which is why I said, let me work on the research piece of it, an independent research piece. So there had been some studies that had been done, in-house with 220, but for the academia piece, you have to have that independent research. And I reached out to different universities. Arizona State University reached back out to me, and I had a meeting with them and said, this is what I'm looking at. Research can be very expensive. 220 is a nonprofit. And would you be willing to do it? They originally were going to just do one study, and it was on our first responders. And ultimately, there's been additional studies that have been done and that are being done this year. So the first study has already been published, and the second study for our armed forces has been submitted for peer review about 10 weeks ago. And the third study, where they asked me to co-author with them, was submitted for peer review 2 weeks ago.
I'll tell you, just so you know, the Military Healthcare Conference in Orlando in August is looking for papers right now. So that might be something. Yeah, I'll send it. It's the largest military healthcare convention in the world, really. It's pretty amazing. But let's talk about the other side. I mean, we talk about therapy gain forever, right? And that's the big problem with a lot of therapeutic models is that, they don't seem to get you back in the cop car or back in the job. They're there to find some other stuff that you got to work on. We all have things to work on, right? We are all flawed human beings. So talk about basically the amount of times that people need to see you before they consider themselves ready to either, they've resolved their trauma or they're ready to get back into life. So tell us about that aspect of your protocol.
Sure. So on average, it's 2 to 4 sessions. Some may need 2 sessions, some may need 3, some may need 4. Everything we do is fully remote for our mission clients. And let me clarify, our mission clients is going to be armed forces, any branch, anytime served, deployed or not. First responders, which we do include 911 dispatchers and corrections, EMT paramedics, LEOs and firefighters, spouses and minor children living in the home, and Gold Star families are covered at no cost. So the other piece to that is we do not report to the VA. So for those of you that are concerned about your rating, you've earned that rating, keep it. And unless you tell somebody you've been through our process, they're not going to know. But the average number of sessions is going to be 2 to 4, and it's done fully remote with our peer coaches that are made up of armed forces, first responders, some spouses.
Wow. And so here's another issue out there. I mean, do you care about their discharge status when they find you?
No, I do not.
Yeah.
If you put on a uniform, if you put on a uniform and you have served and protected us in whatever form that looks, meaning, be it within the armed forces, first responder, you can be retired as a first responder. You don't have to actively be a first responder. You can be retired. And your trauma does not have to come from, work. It does not have to come from deployment, because some come in and they've not been deployed. Trauma's trauma, does not matter. All we want you to do is to have the healing. And so the average sessions would be 2 to 4, clear everything, get it all, whatever that big event is, go all the way back through up to childhood. And so those that are active duty, we get a lot of active duty members right now, or such as first responders and troops. Once you get through that event, reach out to us, and many of them have. So they've gone through the process, then they are at work and they've encountered a new event. Contact us, same thing. We're going to run you through the process and get you out of that trauma.
And that's important for a lot of our folks to know is that, there's, and what I'm learning is that, who we are has been basically formed from our childhood, right? Who we are. And so there are aspects of trauma, and there's a lot of protocols out there, whether it's stellate ganglion blocks or your protocols that look at both aspects of your life. What was your childhood like? and what was your work like? And they do separate those treatments into dealing with those particular aspects of trauma. And a lot of, like, there's been studies going like 90% of special operations guys have had terrible childhoods or some crazy number, right? It's just part of what we came from that maybe drove us into, being a special operator, whatever it is. So, I mean, that's very important for our guests to know is that, hey, you don't have to, I mean, our audience, that, you don't have to be there. You don't have to have been in combat and killed a bunch of people to need this type of help. And this is being offered. This is a service. And I think it's amazingly, powerful. And if you could dial into a little bit more about, why do they not have, what is, obviously they don't have to discuss the trauma, but if you can explain, just a little bit about how that happens, like, they focus on or something that they don't, your job is to not relive it, but to help them through it.
So what's going to happen is, we're going to get you, so for the trauma piece, we're going to get you in a safe place before the event, a safe place after the event. Then we're going to run the certain processes on you. You're doing the work. We're just guiding you. And basically, and again, fully remote. So, that's, I guess, one thing that we can say with COVID shows that a lot of this, positive areas with doing things remotely. But when we get you in when we get you in a safe event or safe place prior to that event, after that event, and then we're just going to get you to really just disconnect. You're going to ultimately run through those steps a few times. Once we get done, we're going to go through and get the emotions management process, which is going to be the negative emotions related to those events. That can be anything from fear, terror, helplessness, guilt, survivor guilt, anger, rage, whatever that looks like, because it's, everyone's going to have different negative emotions related to those events. And then we're going to disconnect those negative events in a safe place as well. So it's a lot of visualization. It's a lot of disconnecting. And again, you're not talking about the content, and having you in a safe place before and after those events.
And and I think, reliving it, and it was kind of funny at that. You mentioned this earlier, but I was at that ayahuasca retreat, and I went up to the people that were listening to these horrible stories that are facilitators, and I said, "Do you do anything to take care of yourself? Because this is something that you're starting to absorb, this negative, energy." And I had my ringer turned off. I don't know what happened, but and you got to take care of yourself. So that's so important. Now let's talk about another issue here, and before we close out, and that is, we as a foundation are pushing hard for modalities like yours to be recognized by the VA or insurance and be covered. You are a nonprofit, but these, it takes money to give free services, right? I mean, there's just no doubt about it. I run a nonprofit myself.
Right.
So, what are the obstacles right now? We've got a suicide rate that has not budged, and some reports indicate it might be increasing. Okay, we already know that the standard protocols from the VA, drugs and therapy, do not work. And you would think that they are looking, I guess there's some MDMA and psilocybin studies going right now, but they're talking decades, before they can be prescribed. And we don't have decades. We have children, I call them children, I'm old, dying right now. Right. And I talk to these kids, and they're snorting heroin. They're broken marriages, lost their kids, lost themselves, and they are suffering in mass. And there's no time to wait. All right. And we're talking about a therapy that's you're not going to go into your office and get broken or get harmed or become ill, like from the wrong drug or whatever it is. You're going to come there and you're going to get help. So what has been your experience with the VA so far? And what are the obstacles? I want the audience to hear about this so that they understand what our battle is. That we are now, it's time and deaths. Okay, we have no time left. We've used up all the time. We can't research this stuff anymore. We already know there's a problem. We already know that there's things like this that are helping veterans get through life and achieve what they deserve, which is peace of mind after serving their country. And they got to go find you. We'll close with that. But tell us about the fights you've had with the VA and what they told you why your protocol can't be which is obviously has a success rate cannot be accepted for coverage.
So 220 has actually applied for grants with the VA, 2 grants actually, and both of those never made it through the first round because they said it was not evidence-based. Well, okay, so anyone in the mental health world and academia world knows that evidence-based takes a while to get that research piece. Hence, going back to almost 2.5 years ago when I said this is very valuable that we get this evidence-based piece and start it. It takes time. That's going to be a barrier because they feel that until it has completely had all the research, that it's being recognized nationally, then they're not listening and they're not going to hear.
That's horse fluff. All right, let me ask you one
Yeah.
question. Out
Yep.
of all the patients you've seen, what percentage do
Mhm.
you feel or tell you that they have received some benefit from your modality?
Can you say that? You were breaking up a
Of
little
all
bit?
the
Sorry.
patients you've seen, like I just say in a week or since you've started this, what
Uh-huh.
percentage roughly, not has said this has helped me out, this has positively impacted myself?
Every single one.
Ha! Well, when you deal with psychiatrists that prescribe medications and have a 25% expectation that that medication might work and that medication has a black box warning or that medication is going to lead to side effects, is going to lead to more medication, why is not a protocol where the patients 100% of them say this helped me? Is that not evidence based? I mean, they went through this, they took it, they came out, they said, yeah, this helped me. That's evidence. That's data. And
Right.
I don't know, they're so up their nose. I mean, everybody's FDA's just horrible about looking at modalities that can't harm you. I can understand if we're talking about a drug that's gonna kill you, right, or
Mhm.
harm you, right. That's one thing. We are talking about therapy. And we just talked about bad therapy. There's more bad therapy going on in this country than there's good therapy. And that's a problem. We're also grossly understaffed with therapists. Yet we have a model here where every person that you've seen has said this has helped me. Yet the VA will not, this is my issue. And that's what I wanted to raise for you. So thank you very
Right.
much.
You are
So
so well.
how do people find you? How do people find Dr. Pam 220? And how do they you know, sorry, ask for help.
Sure. You can go to the website, 22zero220.org. Go up to the top right-hand side where it says contact us. Once you fill that out, it automatically comes to me and it automatically comes to Tricia, which is our amazing social worker.
Yes.
In addition to that, you can call the 1-800 number. So if you're looking on the website and you see the 800 number, call it. What you'll be surprised about is when you call that 800 number, you're not going to get a robot. You're not going to get,
Nah, a human being.
you're going to get me.
Wow.
And so typically when individuals do call in, those are the ones who are really on that forefront of being very much in crisis or are in crisis. And because I do have that clinical background, that's my area. So when you call, you're going to get me. Now, if I am in a meeting or if I'm working with a mission client, leave a number. I'll call you right back. And it won't be 2 days, 3 days. It'll be after I'm done with whatever that, meeting or whatever I'm doing. So you can reach out that way. You can also email gethealed@220.org. You can go that way and give us your name, number, and we're going to reach out to you. You can also contact me directly. My email is Dr. Arnell, DRARN as in Nancy, ELL, at 220.org.
Well, Dr. Pam, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the show and talking about what you're doing for our veterans and first responders. They need this help so bad. I mean,
Yes.
for our audience, I mean, the mental health, side of these jobs, the mental illness rates, the suicide rates are as disturbing as those of the military, especially those that are dealing with, children and human trafficking, high stress occupations, and, it's we owe you, right? We owe you as first responders in the military, and we need to start writing these checks. There's no doubt. I mean, we can write checks for all kinds of other crazy stuff in this country. We can start writing checks for things like that. So, Dr. Pam, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for helping me the other day. That was great. Loved going through the process. And for you, those of you that do have a reason to reach out, Dr. Pam, I do believe that you will have a great experience for sure, and you'll leave a much better healed human being on your path back to health and sanity. As we close out, thank you to the Mac Parkman Foundation, our sponsor. Our podcast series will continue. Stay tuned. We have a town hall for veterans coming up that we will probably live stream in March. Our second annual conference on repetitive brain trauma. We're going to announce the dates this week in September. Anybody that wants to attend, would like to speak, we'll be taking papers, and that'll be held here in Tampa in early September. Can't wait to see you all. Don't forget our Head Smart app on the Apple Play or Google Play stores. Please get that. That's a free app for you parents out there to understand about concussions, subconcussive trauma, and to ask the right questions when your kid has been injured, or to prevent injury by making smarter decisions on contact sports. And don't forget our book, Youth Contact Sports and Broken Brains, is absolutely for free. You don't have to buy it on Amazon. Go to our website, hit download the PDF, and become informed, please. Dr. Arnell, thank you so much. To our audience, thank you so much for the downloads. Really appreciate it. We look forward to bringing on other exciting guests on our series to go ahead and educate you about the risks of repetitive brain trauma. So God bless you all. May you be in peace. Protect your brains and stay tuned. Take care.
Thank you so much.